Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company taking a look at some of the guns they're going to be selling in their upcoming December of 2017 premiere auction. And today, specifically, we're taking a look at not a firearm, but a flare pistol. This is a Japanese 3-barreled Type 90 flare pistol, and it's one of the scarcer versions of Japanese flare pistols from World War II. In total, they made about 30,000 flare pistols. Obviously, this is kind of a utility sort of tool. They're used for signaling, and in particular, they were used on aircraft and ships, the Japanese Navy and Air Force. Not so much by the Army, although the Army did have its own version. As with so much of Japanese ordnance, the Army and the Navy had separate procurement. And in this case, it even got down to the type of flares that were being used. This Navy flare gun uses 28 millimeter in diameter flare. The Army used a 35 millimeter flare, so the ammunition wasn't interchangeable. Now, the Japanese had two different Type 90 flare guns. One was a 2-barrel and one was a 3-barrel. Type 90 just indicates the year that it was adopted, which was the year 2590 on the Japanese calendar, which we would know as 1930. This is kind of like the American military using the M designations. So the US had an M1 rifle, an M1 carbine, and an M1 submachine gun, among other things. Well, same thing with the Japanese. They had multiple different things designated Type 90 because that just indicated the year. Now, there were 3 versions total of this flare pistol. This is the second variation, which is the most common of them. In total, the Japanese made about 5,300 of these guns, and about 3,400 of them were this second pattern. So it does have some neat features to it, including, believe it or not, a recoil system. So let's take a close look at that. Despite the fact that it is designated the Type 90, you won't find that actually written anywhere on this piece, either in English characters or in kanji. Just had the designation, but they didn't feel the need to mark it. So there are a few markings that we can take a look at. Patent number on the side. It's a serial number on the other side, on the right side, just above the trigger. And this emblem right here is the company logo for Kayaba Kogyo KK. They're the manufacturing company, and interestingly, they are still in business today, actually, although not making military flare guns anymore. There are a couple of very small marks on the top barrel of the piece. From left to right, we have a cherry blossom, and then the company logo, that same sort of 3-pointed symbol that was located below. We then have an inspection mark and a naval acceptance anchor. So when the guns were being manufactured, the inspector in the factory added this stamp to indicate that the gun was, had passed inspection, and then when it was formally accepted by the Navy, it had this anchor added as well. More interesting to me than those markings are these colored decals located on each of the barrels. On the very first variation of the gun, by the way, it had a wooden grips typically, and these markings were actually painted on. The second and third variations, these were put on as decals. And for some reason, the green one is the weakest, or perhaps the green one was just the one that always got rubbed against the holster for this thing. The green ones are usually in the worst condition. What these decals actually indicate is the color of the flare that was supposed to be loaded in each of the barrels. And that's why this is a 3-barreled flare pistol. It's not because they needed to fire 3 flares in rapid succession. It was they had 3 different colors for different types, for communicating different messages. And you wanted to have all 3 available so that you could make whatever signal became necessary without having to fumble around and reload different cartridges. So you had a red and yellow, a white, and a green. And then there is a lever on the back of the gun here that flips left, right, and center, and this indicates which barrel you're going to fire. We can reload this by pulling this lever forward, tilting the barrel cluster down. So that's how you'd open it up, quite simple. This little pin here is the barrel lock, and that locks into a hole right there. This center piece, which has sprung out, is a spring-loaded extractor to push empty cases out. In fact, you can see the spring for it right there in the center. So that's all pretty simple and straightforward. There's a manual safety on this side. The red character is fire and the white character is safe. So in safe, the trigger is securely locked. and in fire, well, obviously it'll fire. What looks like a big wing nut on the back here is actually the cocking lever. So I have dropped all 3 firing pins. You can actually see them here. And in order to recock them, you take this and you rotate it counterclockwise about 1/3 of a revolution, let it snap back, and now you can see the tails of all 3 firing pins right there. This lever recocks all 3 simultaneously. If you've only fired one, run the lever, it'll recock the one, doesn't hurt the other 2 in any way. Then the one really unique element to this thing is that it actually has a recoil system. So you have to have the trigger down in order to allow it to recoil, but once you have the trigger held, the whole assembly, whole barrel assembly, everything above the grip can reciprocate backwards. And that's just going to absorb the recoil of firing so that it's less harsh to actually shoot. And that's not the sort of feature that you see on a lot of flare guns. So the serial number on this one is 2600 and change. That puts it just a little before the midway point of production. And these earlier and mid-production guns are pretty darn nice. You can see the finish is pretty good here. When you get into the late production versions and the 3rd variant, they actually only made a couple hundred of right at the end of production. Some of those late guns get much more crude. This was a cast part back here, and they stopped bothering to do a lot of finish machining or polishing on it, so you'll see a really rough texture on the late production guns, as well as they went from this lacquer finish to kind of a blued finish with a less durable paint or lacquer over it. The 3rd variant guns also have a distinctly different lever for opening the barrels. It's a curved lever that comes down like this. The 1st variation has a slightly different lever than this, although I don't have a good reference for it. And the 1st variant guns also typically had wooden grips. Flare pistols are one of those interesting areas of collecting that's a little bit off the beaten path for most people. In some places, legislation and regulations make it much easier to collect flare pistols than actual firearms. And a lot of these things just have interesting mechanical features of their own, like the recoil system on this. So if you'd be interested in adding this behemoth to your own personal collection, or perhaps you're making a sci-fi movie and you need an excellent firearm prop, well, take a look at the description text below. You'll find a link there to Rock Island's catalog page on this guy. You can see their pictures, their price estimate, etc. And there is actually a second one of these also in the auction. So if you do a little bit of searching in their catalog, you can find that one as well and take a look at it. Thanks for watching.